Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar. We have been getting multiple calls about ADA compliance and websites. And so we thought it'd be good to bring someone on to talk a little bit about this, talk about what they're seeing in Pennsylvania, and be available to answer some questions for you if you have any questions about this. We have Jeremy with us. He is with, as you can see, ADA site compliance. He'll be doing the presentation, and he said he's welcomed any interruptions during the presentation. So if you have questions, feel free to ask questions while he's talking, or you can use the chat feature and we'll monitor that and take that, answer the questions at the end. We are recording this, so we'll get this out to you at the later on today with Jeremy's contact information. But with that, I'm going to kick this off to you, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Hope, and thank you, Eric, as well. And nice to virtually meet everybody. It's a small group for the live session, which is nice, as Hope said, because we can make it more interactive, unless everybody is in fact working their other full-time job. But a couple of things. I should say first, our whole senior team is from Pennsylvania. Our CEO, Scott Trachtenberg, is a Philly guy, and our CTO, Scott Rubenstein, that we're all, I'm not from Philly, I'm from Baltimore, but there is a long-standing connection to the state of Pennsylvania at ADA Site Compliance. Everyone seems to have Philly sports gear up all the time in the office. So I asked Scott this morning if there was anything we could do to extend a special offer in light of that connection, and he said absolutely. So I'll mention that at the end. So we'll jump in. I'm hoping again to make this interactive. So let me just start with one comment and then a question. So the comment is that having presented many times on digital accessibility, what we find often is that there's a wide range of experience with and knowledge about this topic among webinar participants. And so sometimes we're too basic for some people, and other times we're way too advanced for others. And that kind of makes it difficult to get the right tone and make sure that we're hitting the right level when we're talking to people. So apologies in advance if this is too remedial for you, or if it's a little, 400 level. But let me start by just soliciting any questions. What are there particular things that attendees want to hear? And if we don't hear from the participants, Hope, if you want to, or Eric, if you want to chime in and say, are there particular hot topics right now among the hospitality folks?
I'll say one that I've been asked before is, I think it's just the general with their websites. What do they need to do? How can they help? How can they fix this? Like what, do they have to do? And a lot of them, we've gotten calls of where they're doing their websites over, and how do we set this up right from the beginning? So I think that's a lot of, where we see questions coming in, just realizing that there are some things they should be looking at now that people are going to people's websites more too, for
Sure.
information. So
perfect, will do. And we get that a lot. People are replatforming, they're putting new content out. They want to know, how do we take a root cause approach to make sure that we're actually publishing and creating content that is ADA compliant? So that's a great question. Okay, so let's dive in. I tend to jump around a lot. I don't read entire slides at a time. Nobody wants to be bound to a PowerPoint. So again, forgive me if I'm jumping around a bit, but I want to try to cover a lot of what's in here. We're not going to get to everything most likely, but a quick agenda. We're going to do a quick overview. We'll go into some of the principles of accessibility, some best practices, and then we'll finish up with any Q&A. But again, feel free to jump in throughout. So quick overview. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. ADA website compliance has continued to be a major issue over, it's really been about 5 years now since litigation took off in earnest. But you can see in 2020, we had about 3,500 lawsuits that were filed in federal court. This is not specific to hospitality. This is the big picture. So I'm talking about nationally. how many cases there were. And that was a 20% uptick from the year before that. And that excludes all of the actions that are less than formal complaints. So things like demand letters and threats. So a lot of people get those and they're not sure what to do. And a lot of times there's never a formal suit that's filed against a defendant. They get the letter and that's enough to take action. I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to strip out what are called ORS cases. I usually don't go this specific this early, but because we're talking to hotels, in particular, ORS cases are the online reservation systems cases. So that I've stripped that number, those cases out of that 3,500 that you see there. But we can certainly talk about reservation systems if people want. And then you can see that 85% of the cases are around retail and hospitality. So hospitality continues to be, along with e-com, I would say the most popular target for plaintiffs right now. You can see that there have recently been some niches that have been very profitable for plaintiffs to go after. So it's not just the big industries, but sometimes things like potato chip companies get targeted, and all of a sudden you'll see a dozen suits show up on the court docs just going after all the potato chip makers. That happened. So I don't know how many of you have e-com platforms. I wouldn't think many in the hospitality industry do. So we won't spend a lot of time on Shopify and Wix sites, but suffice to say they've really come into view in the last year. This current year in 2021, there have been about 2,000 cases so far. Let me just take a step back. So in my role at the company, one of the things I do is I personally track every single lawsuit that gets filed in federal court. And also a lot of the state jurisdictions. I don't track every state. It's impossible to keep up with every district in the United States, but some of the most active ones for sure. So the numbers I'm sharing with you aren't official numbers. These are taken from my own spreadsheet that I update daily. So again, they're not set in stone, but think of them as a good guide. So of the 2,000 so far this year, you can see about just under 10% have been filed in Pennsylvania. California and New York continue to lead the charge as far as this litigation goes. These are two states that have the most pro-plaintiff judges and courts. Florida has had a lot in the past, but there have been some decisions recently, and I won't go again too into the weeds on that, but that have really sort of stemmed the tide on Florida litigation. But Pennsylvania has been a close third. So I think it's really relevant that we're talking about the state of Pennsylvania today. You can see for this last year in Pennsylvania, almost all of the cases are being brought in the Western District. They're being filed in the Erie and the Pittsburgh courts. Last year, you saw a lot more action in Philadelphia. This year, for whatever reason, there's been less of that, but there's certainly no reason that won't pick up again. Why have we seen so much activity in Pennsylvania? There are a couple of plaintiff law firms that have been super active this past year, and plaintiffs themselves who I've named down here in order of prolificness. Anthony Murphy, Blair Douglas. So these plaintiffs tend to be blind individuals. That doesn't mean that you can't also be targeted for a lawsuit if your plaintiff is not blind or low vision. A lot of times cases are brought by people who are deaf or hard of hearing over things like captions on videos. Sometimes they're brought by those with physical disabilities. Keyboard websites have to be keyboard usable, and a lot of times the way they're built, they're not. So you see lawsuits brought by a variety of different types of plaintiffs, and you can see the firms below that here. Lawrence Fisher, East End Trial Group, which is Kevin Tucker's group. These are the primary plaintiff firms that are bringing the actions against hotels, against restaurants, and against other types of defendants. Most of the litigation you see is being driven, in fact, by these firms. It's less common to find just a run-of-the-mill person who's blind or deaf who says, hey, I can't use this website, I'm going to file a lawsuit. No, you have attorneys who are working very closely with their plaintiffs, and there are about 20 or 30 of these firms nationwide that are accounting for 99% of the cases that are being filed. So let me stop for a second. Has anybody who's on the call here actually received a lawsuit or a threat or wants to volunteer it? Because you're not alone if you have. There's no shame around it. Okay. People sometimes don't want to share, but we usually assume that anyone who's dialed into a call like this has at least heard of this. They're aware of the issue and they're wanting to take some action. So let's proceed as though everybody has the awareness of this litigation and maybe has even received a threat at some point. Some of the new trends we're seeing this year, especially in Pennsylvania with these law firms that I've mentioned here, that have been, I would say, disturbing, are really the increase in the demand amount. That's been the big one. We've seen plaintiffs, some of the ones I've named here, asking for just really inordinate amounts of money, where it used to be that they'd ask for $10,000, or they would ask for $20,000 to settle a lawsuit, and the defendant would come back and say, we'll give you $5,000, and you'd meet somewhere in the middle. Now you're seeing demands for $45,000, $50,000 oftentimes, and the amounts that defendants are settling on is closer to $20,000, $25,000 in many cases. That's often because the plaintiffs are trying to certify or try to get a class, make this a class action suit. And so they feel justified in saying, listen, we're going to give you the chance to settle a lawsuit individually for $40,000, or you can settle as a class for $45,000. And the defendant doesn't really know what to do, and they go to their attorney and they end up coming to this middle ground number, but it's still a much higher number than we've seen in past years. The other development we've seen is that a lot of these attorneys are saying it's no longer okay for you to just grab a widget. And by widget, I mean one of these, you'll see them at the bottom of your screen sometimes, these buttons that you click and it opens up a box, and the box gives you or gives your users things like better color contrast or larger fonts. These are things that supposedly make the site more usable for people with disabilities. In some cases, that is true. There are some select use cases where a visitor to your site might benefit from having that option. But by and large, we find that these widgets are not making the websites accessible. They're certainly not making them fully accessible. And they're also not providing you as the website owner with any sort of meaningful risk mitigation. So definitely do not think that buying one of these and putting it on your website is going to forestall any sort of litigation against your hotel or your restaurant, your restaurant. We'll spend a couple minutes on this because I think it's really important. It's not a full fix, as I just said, and in some cases we're finding that these widgets are actually making the experience harder for users with disabilities. And again, I realize we're kind of jumping in at a pretty granular level, so we will step back and we'll talk more about, what it means to be accessible and how to get there. So don't worry, I haven't lost you yet, hopefully. But you can see some of the reasons here. Technology like these widgets will often not be usable for somebody who's blind, who has their own assistive devices in place. They just don't integrate well. And so it's very frustrating for someone who's blind to now have to try to figure out where to go on your website to book a room or to book a reservation, because their stuff is not integrating with your stuff. So we're also seeing a rise in the number of claims against defendants who have these widgets and overlays already installed. I've seen personally over 100 this year. There've probably been more than that. And in many cases, the plaintiffs are coming out and saying in the lawsuit that the plaintiff went to the website and saw this widget and it made things worse. So they're really frustrated by this. There's a link here to a YouTube video that demonstrates why this has become a problem. We're not going to watch it now, but you'll have the deck after the presentation. You should definitely go back and take a look. It's a short video. And then copycats. So we're still seeing a lot of defendants getting targeted for website accessibility lawsuits who have been targeted previously. So just because you've been sued or threatened doesn't mean you're not going to get targeted again. About 25% of the cases that we see are against defendants who have been previously targeted for website inaccessibility. And as I say here, you can DM me afterwards if you have specific questions or you want to talk further about this. So let's just talk about what COVID has meant for digital accessibility. The work from home environment has really driven the need for greater access. People have needed more while they've been home. They've needed not just more access to services, but access to critical services, things like food and medicine. So people aren't just frustrated because they can't buy their Nikes, in hot pink, which is the kind of thing some courts frown upon. Why are the judges say, why are you clogging up my docket with these frivolous suits? No, now it's like, hey, people can't always go out. They need food, they need medicine, and they legitimately cannot get what they need. And I would argue that restaurants, maybe less for hotels, but restaurants definitely fall under that purview just because a lot of people are ordering in, especially as there are more lockdowns and there are rolling lockdowns. We don't know when the next round of these will be. So also the reliance on mobile technology. It's not just about websites. A lot of people are ordering food and making reservations through their apps, through mobile websites. So we've seen a rise in the number of suits against defendants that have products that are available via app. And also, let's not discount the fact that a lot of plaintiffs or a lot of attorneys have been struggling to expand their business in the pandemic, and this has provided a really convenient and easy way for them to quickly, turn a buck. Pardon the crudeness, but that's how a lot of attorneys view this: is, hey, I'm already doing stuff in the ADA space. How hard would it be to start filing suits against hotels and restaurants? So we've seen the entrance of some new players in the last year and a half. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either. There was an attempt in Washington to actually govern what defines accessibility legally, because until now we've been in this legal gray area. A question we get all the time is, how do I know if I'm accessible or not? And unfortunately, there is no current legally binding standard. What we have is the ADA, which every one of you on this call knows about as an operator of a hospitality franchise or organization, right? You understand ramps and rails and the height of sinks and faucets and those sorts of things. So that is the same 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act that governs digital accessibility as well. Now, obviously, 1990 was pre-internet in a meaningful way. We didn't have the first commercial browsers at that point, so nobody knew what was coming 4 or 5 years later in 1990 with the advent of the popular internet. So nothing in the ADA specifically speaks to the web or virtual venues. But you do have places of public accommodation, and that's what we're talking about here. So are you a place of public accommodation? I would say you probably are. There have been wranglings here in Florida, recently in New York, as to whether or not online-only businesses are considered places of public accommodation and whether they fall under the ADA for these purposes. As a restaurant, as a hotel, you obviously have a physical bricks and mortar location. And so this argument you may hear about called the nexus argument. Is there a nexus or a tie between the website and the physical space is less relevant for our purposes today. So there was this bill that was introduced that would have tried to clarify all of this, and it failed in Congress last session. There's currently another attempt to try to legislate what is ADA compliance legally. I personally am not optimistic that it will pass. Most people who are in our space who are advocates for accessibility are also not very hopeful about it, because the provisions in it really aren't very good for people with accessibility questions or disabilities rather. Trade groups have wanted to see this passed. obviously, and are lobbying hard in Washington. But I wouldn't expect anything definitive from Congress or from the Department of Justice, and that's who administers the Americans with Disabilities Act. So let me stop, take a breath there. Questions about any of this so far? I'm moving kind of fast, I know. No questions. Okay. All right. We'll push on. Okay. So let's spend a few minutes on accessibility and what it means. So you may have heard of POUR. It's an acronym for accessibility under the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We're currently in version 2.1 of those Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The WCAG is not a legally binding standard of accessibility. It is, however, the de facto standard that is being followed in most courts and by most operators of websites. So you've probably heard of WCAG. Up until about 3 years ago, we were in version 2.0 of WCAG, and then now we're in 2.1. 2.1 expanded it to include new sets of criteria, things relating to mobile, people with cognitive disabilities, that sort of thing. We're now actually looking at 2.2, which is coming soon, and then WCAG 3.0. These guidelines are being put forth by a private body known as the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. And so they're currently in the process of taking feedback from people, trying to figure out what these new guidelines are going to look like when they come down. And so the POUR acronym just means, as you can see, that a website should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the broad criteria for WCAG. How are they implemented? There's a set of success criteria, and you can find these very easily. They're online. If you Google WCAG success criteria, you will see them. It's something like 70 some odd principles, not principles, but specific things that you have to do to make your website accessible. So some of these involve how images are presented on a website, or how a mouse, how a keyboard is used on a website. The short version is you should be able to use a website completely without a mouse, right? So that's one of them. Transcripts on audio or on video, right? So if you have video up that's promoting your restaurant or your hotel, you should have captions on that video. But also you should have things like tags, like image tags, so that if somebody's blind, somebody who's blind comes to your website and is using a screen reader, which is the software that somebody who's blind uses to navigate a site, they know that they've hit a video. It's not just for people who are deaf, it's also for people who are blind. So that often gets overlooked by operators of websites. We see, alt text is the kind of easy example everybody goes to first when talking about accessibility, but any image, backtrack, not every image, most images on a website should have alt text. And as you may know, this is just the text in the code, in your source code, that tells somebody what the purpose of an image is. What is it telling us? What's in that image? I say almost because not every image on a website needs to have alt text. Something that you have on your website that is purely decorative, right? That's maybe a picture of your logo, or it's a set of spray of flowers that doesn't actually convey something meaningful to the user, actually does not need to have alt text. And so having that alt text, having that tag in your website code can actually be a distraction and make it harder for somebody who's disabled to use the website. So these are the sorts of questions that we deal with as web accessibility experts, and that we help you as website owners work through. Color is another one you probably are familiar with. There's a standard, there's a ratio rather. There has to be a 4.5 to 1 brightness ratio between the background of something that you're looking at and the text on that background. Anything short of that, and somebody who's blind or somebody who's low vision rather, may not be able to perceive what it is that they're looking at. And so you have to make sure your color contrast is correct. Video, we already talked about. And then documents, if you have things like menus that are in PDF form on your website, those PDF documents need to be accessible as well. A couple examples of things to look out for. Blinking, flashing lights can induce seizures in people who are epileptic. You should have a skip link always on your website. So when you first come to your site, you can test this yourself, by the way. Go to your website, highlight the URL bar at the top where the website address is, and then start to hit the tab key. And doing that is going to approximate what somebody who's blind will do when he or she comes to your site using their screen reader. They're going to use their screen reader to move through the website in an orderly way. So if you start to tab and you don't see a skip link, meaning skip to content comes up, that gives the user a chance to jump over all the stuff at the top of the website, all the navigation, and go to the main part of the website where the content is. You should have that. Okay? Not having it isn't going to mean that you're going to be sued immediately, but it's just one of many things that somebody who's landing on your website is going to look for when determining, are you a good candidate to be sued. Forms are a big one. So if you have anything on your website that is taking data from the user, you need to make sure that things that the fields are designed properly so that the data can be input properly. And if there are errors, if the person using your site inputs the wrong information, that the errors are specific and that it tells the user, hey, you put in the wrong password, not just you made an error. Because think about how frustrating that would be, if you already can't see the website and now you don't even know what you did incorrectly on the website. So transcripts are great to have for video, for other things, video content in particular, though, and making sure that the page is really designed properly, that your structure of your page is correct. So they talk about header order, and I'm getting really granular here, when you get into the way a site is built, does it flow in an intuitive way so that somebody who's blind could say, all right, this is the title of the page. These are the lists I'm going to see. Everything is coming to me in a way that I expect it to come to. Really important here. Web accessibility is not about fixing it one time and letting it go. It's dynamic. Content is dynamic. The regulations and the laws around this are always changing, as you saw with the WCAG versions that are coming down. So you should definitely not think about this as a set it and forget it proposition. Ideally, and hope to your question at the beginning, you want to take a root cause approach to making your content accessible, which means, and I say it here at the bottom, training your staff or anybody who's creating content to know whether they're creating content in a way that is accessible and compliant under the ADA. I fully recognize that people don't always have in-house teams that know how to do this. You might not even have a web agency that is expert at this. I will give a word of caution. It's really important to check with your agency if you're using an agency, because a lot of them will tell you, yes, we understand website accessibility. We have a solution. We're building you a site that is accessible, and they often mean well. They just don't know what they don't know. And ultimately, web design firms are in the same business that you're in and that we're in. And that's the business of not losing their clients. So they will often say whatever they need to say to make sure that the relationship is good and, hey, we've got this covered. But you know what? They don't have it covered. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've seen this where a website owner comes to me or their development agency comes to me and says, we built our client a fully accessible site. And I'll say to them, oh, that's great. How do you know that? We tested it. And I'll say, how did you test it? They'll say, we use the Wave tool. Well, the Wave tool is great. The Wave tool is a free tool that you can use to go through the website and check to see if there are issues. The problem is that the Wave tool, as any technology, can only find a limited number of issues on a website. So that number is somewhere around 15 to 30%, depending on the quality of the tools that you're using. It can tell you things like you're missing your alt text. You need to tag these images. What it can't tell you is if your alt text is correct. So I use this example a lot. It's a humorous one, but if you have pictures of if you have a picture of two houses, right? And I'm using an example from the real estate world, and you've tagged your image as two horses because you hit R instead of U, then it's funny, but the person using the screen reader is going to hear read aloud to them by their screen reader two horses, and they're going to wonder, what website am I on? Like, I'm looking for houses. So automation will not tell you that your alt text is incorrect. So you don't want to be overly reliant on these free tools, but they're a good place to start. So moving through some of the issues here, do you have multiple people on your team who are creating content for you? If so, one of the challenges, and I see this with hotels and restaurants a lot, is how do I make sure that one person is uploading content, the same way as the other person is? It's not about, it is about rather centralizing that process and making sure that your content creation team is all on board with how to do this. Otherwise, you're going to have people freelancing and someone's going to do it wrong, and they're going to break the accessibility features that you've built into your website. So, and here, as you see, it's all connected. So you can fix one thing on a website, and in the process of making it compliant or accessible, you can break something else. This is one of the great challenges with trying to go it alone, or Googling, how do I make my website accessible? Unless you have somebody who really understands this, there's a good likelihood that you're going to make something else worse. Lastly, you can see here, you want to have a relationship with a web agency. I'm not here to give a commercial for our company. Obviously, I'm happy to speak with you after the webinar if you have questions. But you want to have, ideally, somebody in-house who understands this stuff, and then have an outside agency that you can just vet things with and who can run audits for you and give you feedback on an ongoing basis. One of the benefits there is that if you are doing testing in-house, you can give it your best shot and then vet it with an objective third party who can say, hey, you did a great job. There are some things that you should really optimize here to improve your site. Or if you have someone who's great, will tell you, you did a great job. Your website's fully usable. But often what happens is you will have things on your website that you are not in control of, right? Especially in the hospitality industry. Something like an online reservation system, which we discussed quickly before, is not under your control most often. You're purchasing that or licensing it from an ORS provider, and their stuff's just not fully accessible. A lot of the companies are making strides toward making reservation systems better, but I have yet to see one that is fully accessible. I'll give you an example. If you're setting your calendar dates for your stay, you should be able to go do that with a keyboard and get in and out of that reservation system, that booking widget easily. You should not be stuck in a keyboard trap where you're hitting the button and you can't get out of it. That happens so often. So same with reservations for restaurants, right? If you're using a third party like Resi.com, that's a really common one. They're definitely aware of these issues, but there's only so much that you are going to be able to do to make those accessible. You're not gonna lean on Resi.com and say, hey, I got this lawsuit or this threat, and now I need you to make your plugin or your functionality fully accessible. They know. They know that. They just, they can't possibly do it for all of their clients. Let me take another breath there and stop for a second. It's 36 minutes past the hour. Checking in with people.
I'm still here.
That Hope?
That's me. It's Hope. I'm still here.
I may be talking to no one. That's okay. I'm talking to you, Hope, and Eric.
And Eric.
And whoever's watching later on demand. So let's take a few minutes. We'll go through some best practices for defending claims, right? And for making your site accessible. So we get asked this all the time. So what should I be doing, right? The first thing that you should do, obviously, is have an expert who's working with you closely, but you want to have an accessibility policy that is posted on your website. So accessibility policies can really mean two different things. One is from an internal policies and procedures standpoint, do you have a set of protocols that you're following, right? Are you training your employees on accessibility? I would think as a hotel or a restaurant, absolutely. Of course, there's something that you're telling your staff, right? If we get a complaint, what do we do? I would say don't treat web accessibility any differently. There should be policies built in for how are we going to continue to make our website open and usable, open to and usable by anybody, right? But I see a chat question. Let me get there in 1 second. But the other meaning of an accessibility policy is literally what's posted on your website. There should be something at the bottom in the footer of your site that says accessibility. And when you click on that, it takes you to a page that says, here are the steps that we are taking to make our website and keep our website fully accessible for people with disabilities. Our efforts are ongoing. That's important to say, right? Every lawsuit we see, almost every lawsuit, I should say, specifically mentions the lack of an accessibility policy. So having one posted will not insulate you from being sued, but if you don't have one, you're just inviting trouble. So let me see, what was our question? Oh, from Molly. Are there specific questions I can ask my web company to sound knowledgeable when asking how accessible my site is? Absolutely. It's a great question. Ask them, first ask them, are we accessible? When they say yes, ask them, how do you know? What are you testing? What criteria are you testing to? Ask them, are you testing to WCAG? And if so, what version, right? What tools are you using? Ask them, are you just using Wave? And say to them, if they say, yes, we use Wave, but we also do other types of testing. Ask them, have you used end users? Do you have end users who are testing this? And if so, what are they doing? That will be really determinative of whether your agency understands how to test a website for accessibility. If they tell you we stuck this widget on your website, then you should really be concerned. I'm not going to name them all here, but there are four or five of them that are leading the market right now. And as I said, they just offer this false promise that you're going to be able to set it and forget it. Spend a couple $100, stick this thing on the site, and you're going to be all good. If your agency tells you they've done that, you should really be nervous now, because your agency does not really understand accessibility. Good question. And thank you for confirming that there are people listening. So yeah, definitely get your policy posted on your website. Making sure that your new content is accessible is easier said than done, as I mentioned before, because you actually have to have a team that's creating content in an accessible way. And you, of course, want to make sure that what's already on your website is accessible. That's the first thing to do. Before you think about new policies and procedures, have an audit done. Ideally, you want a human audit, right? You want to have people who have disabilities go on your website and test it and tell you, here's what we're not able to use, and to be as specific as possible. That's our approach at ADA Site Compliance. So we have a team of about 50 testers who go on, and they work in groups of 3. There is always one non-cited and one cited member of each team. There's always at least one quality assurance manager, and they are going through your website and they are using things like JAWS. JAWS is a screen reader that you may have heard of before. So that's the technology that's going to read aloud all the components of a website. They're using other forms of assistive technology too. There are dozens of them. And they're going to use a variety of tools and then provide a report saying, here's what we found. Here's where your errors or your failures exist. right? Here is a definition for you of why these are in fact errors, and a recommendation on how you should fix them. That is what a deliverable should look like to the owner of a website who is paying to have a human audit done. So develop a plan, right? Know that something is better than nothing. If you can't, if it's not in the budget right now to pay for a full audit of your website, you know, have somebody who is blind go through and, you know, maybe pay them hourly to just spend an hour on your website and give you that feedback, right? Training we talked about a little bit. Um, Having contact information that should be on your policy. So there should be a phone number and an email address that's posted for anybody who needs help using the site. Very importantly, that information should not refer people back to the website. If they're calling you or emailing you because they can't use the site, it's just a slap in the face to hear, please go to our website to learn about our hours and our accessible features of our rooms. So that's when you get sued, is when somebody's like super frustrated that they can't get a hold of someone. And then, as I said, you want to have somebody who is regularly testing the site, somebody who is qualified to do that. So we talked a lot about all the threats and the fear and the litigation, but there's some great reasons beyond just not getting sued to make your website accessible for all. Obviously, there's the legal aspect of it, right? It's actually the ethical thing and the lawful thing to do to make your website usable for all, but you're going to make the experience better for your current users. They're going to be able to find what they need faster. You're also going to expand your customer base, right? So as people learn that, hey, this restaurant is great, I was really able to use their website, find what I need, they're going to tell their friends. And the ally community, accessibility, you see sometimes A11Y, some people call it, say, ally, but or the accessibility community is a very tight community. People talk, and I'm on a Slack channel with literally thousands of people from our field who share all the time. Hey, did you guys see that one company that tried to shortcut accessibility? Did you see what they did? Like, I would never use them, or let's make sure nobody uses that provider. Similarly, when they have a great experience, they share and they go, hey, this company did something really cool. You know, they provided an accessible chatbot. So I'm able to talk to their customer service people in real time in a fully accessible way. That news gets around, and it expands your customer base, which ultimately means money to the bottom line. So the other thing you'll see is when you fix your website, you're going to be doing things like fixing broken links. All of this makes your site more usable to everyone, not just people with disabilities. And that's going to expand or enhance your visibility in Google and other search engines. And that's great for your visibility and for your brand. So good PR, better SEO, doing what's right and lawful, making more money at it. It's like a quadruple win. So I see we are at a quarter of. So just to conclude, what do I need to do as the owner of the site or operator of the site? I need to have an action plan, right? Understand that every business is exposed at some level. There are companies that have been sued literally 30 times. I'm thinking of one in particular, a major international fashion brand. They're a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. You know, to settle out these suits for $10, $20, $30,000 at a time, and then to obviously pay the demand amount to the plaintiff, then to pay their attorneys. They may spend $50,000 to $100,000 each time. It's still a cost of doing business for them. They just find it easier to spend that money than to spend what could be seven figures to fix the underlying problem. For a company like that, that is not most likely you. You know, you're not a $20 billion a year company. But still, you know, having to spend, call it $20,000 to settle a suit, then you've got your attorney's fees, you've got the cost of your audit, the cost of your remediation, actually fixing the site. It can easily be a mid-5 to low six-figure proposition, all in, by the time you're done. So Yes, realize that you're potentially exposed and do the things that you can. Don't panic. Um, right? You can only control what you can control. Obviously, have good legal counsel. There are plenty of attorneys that we work with who are great at this, many of whom specialize in the hospitality sector. Um, if you don't have somebody internally, you should have really somebody internally and outside guiding you on this. And I'm happy to share some names of people offline who can be helpful to you. Um, really focus on usability, right? Not just patching the problem, but ask yourself and the people you're working with, are we fixing the root problem? Can somebody come to our site and use the site? Don't get hung up on every color contrast issue, right? That's missing the forest for the trees. Bring in the specialists. Okay, you've got enough to do to run your own business as it is. You don't need to become an expert yourself on this. You want to know enough to know what you do and don't know. Um, proactive stance. You definitely have a proactive stance. Don't wait to be sued. Do the things that you can now before that threat comes in, and building accessibility into your daily practice. It means in your meetings having discussions with your team while you're talking about physical barriers as well. Talk about virtual barriers. Okay, I'm sure it must come up all the time. Everybody has clients or customers who are disabled, so this should not be a foreign concept for anybody who's listening to this webinar. Let me stop there. Our contact info is here, so please reach out. I'm happy to speak with you. We do get, as you can imagine, hundreds and hundreds of inquiries we're dealing with at any point, anywhere from 100 to 200 potential clients. So we're very busy, but we're happy to take the time and talk to you. As I said, our CEO, our CTO, several of our shareholders are from Philly in particular, but they have Pennsylvania ties. So we always have an affinity for those of you from the great state of Pennsylvania. Full stop. Let's open it up. Let's see what questions you guys have.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was great. Maybe you were just too thorough for everybody. They probably need to go back and think about what they're doing. Maybe come back to you with some more questions.
That's fine. But
I appreciate you taking time to present this to everybody, because I know this is sometimes things that you don't think about until you need to think about it. And I think it's good to be proactive and be just cognizant, just knowing that it's happening out there, and that it's important to keep it in front of mind when you're redoing things.
Absolutely. And it's my pleasure. Again, feel free to ping me offline. I understand people don't always want to share things publicly, but happy to chat with you about it. And one thing I think I forgot to mention is we do continue to see hospitality high up on the list nationally as far as the targets of lawsuits. E-com has become number one for sure, and e-com spans a lot of different types of industries, of course. I have not seen specifically any sort of targeted campaign against hospitality establishments in Pennsylvania. I just want to make that clear. I don't have a reason to believe that. Of course, now that I'm saying it, I shouldn't have said it. I don't believe that the plaintiffs' firms I mentioned are specifically scanning for hotels and restaurants in Pennsylvania with the idea that we're just going to go sue them all in mass. But I have seen many, many times an industry get targeted, and then you see a wave of lawsuits, as I mentioned with like the potato chip makers, right? Colleges and universities. There's one plaintiff who just goes through, and I've seen them sue 30 different colleges at a time. And there's a narrative there for a court. If the court ever calls them out and says, why are you doing this? Well, the plaintiff can plausibly say, hey, I'm looking to take, online classes, and I had a reason to go to 30 different websites, right? So there is that same plausibility in the hospitality industry. Hey, I wanted to order chicken wings. So yeah, I was on 10 different websites of restaurants that have chicken wings. Like, it's a little more plausible than the plaintiffs who are suing, a tool, electric tool company one day, and then, a cosmetic cosmetics brand the next day, and then they're suing a college. It's kind of like, well, what are you really after here? And the judges know that, the courts know that. So
Yeah, definitely. And so Molly just wrote in, you need to look at my site first, and then I'm sure I'll have a million questions. So,
oh, that's the special offer. Sorry. Yes.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot you had a special offer.
Per Scott, our CEO, who I spoke to this morning, he said anybody on the call who wants to have us take a complimentary look at the website and offer high level feedback. We're not going to do a full audit, but we'll spend an hour going through the website and telling you, here's some items that we found. Here's also how we would go about next steps if you were to do something. We're not the kind of company that's going to lock you in and say, all right, now that you've consulted with us, we're not high pressure salespeople. We really genuinely want you to have a good experience with us. And if you don't use us, that's fine too. At the end of the day, you got to do what's right for you and for your business. So happy to take a free look at your site for you.
There you go, Molly. So definitely reach out to Jeremy at his contact information. We'll include that. Just let everybody know to make sure to stay tuned for the special offer at the end of the webinar, so they can listen through and make sure to listen for that. But I don't know if we have any other questions, but I appreciate everybody getting on the call, and Jeremy, for you taking some time out of your day to put this together and to present it to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And
All
we'll be in
right.
touch.
Well, with that, we will conclude this, but yeah, we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you.
All right. Bye, Hope. Bye, Eric.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.